pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Frances Lazenby and I am the Head of Strategic Solutions at the Ozone Project. I have about 10 minutes to talk to you today. It's going to be very much a whistle-stop tour of how we at Ozone have been able to leverage our first-party data in order to read the nation. Now, what do I mean when I say read the nation? Well, how we're able to use our first-party data to understand content consumption trends and audience behaviour at nationwide scale, and then how we can apply this data and these insights to meet the challenges of brands in the real world today. So for those of you who may not be aware of who Ozone are, I'll let you off, we're still fairly young. I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour of our history. So we are essentially a digital advertising business created by publishers for brands. So we launched in 2018 with our 4 founding publishers. That was News UK, The Guardian, Telegraph and Reach. And subsequently, we've expanded our alliance to include more than a dozen premium publisher groups. Now, the word premium in there is really, really key. I think we can hopefully all agree in here that premium, high attention, editorially governed environments deliver better results for brands. So hence, Ozone was created to be able to deliver these results at kind of national platform scale, time and time again for brands. Now, of course, if I'm going to talk about insights today, I need to talk a little bit about our data. So at the heart of Ozone, we have our first-party, completely unique cross-publisher data set comprised of real-world reading behaviour. So that gives us a 360-degree view of kind of an individual user, what they're reading, what they're passionate about. Yes, sorry. And then what we're able to do with that data, which is kind of rich, robust, highly current, we've then been able to create tools for both internal and external teams to be able to drill into this data, mine the insight, and apply that for their clients. So I think the best place to probably start then is to look at some kind of recent content consumption trends to really understand why it is that British consumers are coming to our publishers time and time again. They're coming because they want to be informed, entertained, and inspired. You might have seen it in the most recent Enders analysis. They said that one of the knock-on effects of this extraordinary news run that we are living in at the moment is that there's been a kind of renewed sort of confidence given back to news publishers that there is indeed still a real role, a purpose, and a significant group of people who really value the content that they're producing. And this kind of extraordinary news run is something we've seen playing out amongst our publishers. Just looking at the first 6 weeks of this year, across, even before Russia invaded Ukraine, across our publishers, we were seeing on average 10% higher weekly unique readers. That equates to about 2 million additional readers across Ozone every single week. And of course, this kind of global news run that we're living in will, of course, have a knock-on effect with macro events here domestically as well. I think it kind of goes without saying we are living through a kind of cost of living crisis with increasing costs of fuel, food, energy, and now national insurance as well. So I'm sure you felt that recently. And that kind of has led to a serious increase in the need for trusted, concise, clear advice in this age of misinformation that we are living. As a result, then what we've seen is within personal finance alone, a 35% increase in engagement in the last quarter compared to the same period last year. Specifically, a 45% increase in gas and electrics and personal tax information. Just for some context, this time last year was by no means a quiet period when it comes to personal finance. We're about to enter the 3rd national lockdown, and individuals and businesses up and down the country were relying very heavily on government subsidies and help when it comes to their finances. So it just goes to show that we weren't starting from a low base when we're comparing these numbers. And really it shows that since the pandemic, there's been a kind of reinforced or rekindled relationship and trust between publishers and their readers. And this rekindled relationship really represents or kind of presents an opportunity for brands to harness that, not only in the case of being in those environments, but how do they understand their audiences and use that data to really get to know their customers and potential new customers. So one such example is some work we've done recently for a travel brand. So it goes without saying, travel is probably one of the worst affected industries during the pandemic. And even during this period of recovery that they've been going through, I think there's been a real shift and a change in booking patterns and behaviours that have meant that that same security blanket at the start of the year may have given is no longer really there. And people are looking to book later and later in the year when perhaps they're a little bit more confident of what their year is going to look like. I've got a little bit of experience in the travel industry, spot some of my old clients in here actually, and I kind of became very used to that formulaic approach that we have of building brand and front of mind awareness in the lead up to Christmas, and then as soon as January hits, really kind of hammering on the sales messaging and owning that very competitive space. But this change in consumer buying patterns has meant that this January security blanket is sort of diminishing as time goes on. So this particular client of ours came and said, how do we sort of buck this trend? How do we encourage users to book earlier in the year just to give us a little bit more security as we move through the year? What we were able to do then is combine our travel destination content data and engagement data with booking data to understand what that pattern looks like. When are people starting to be engaged with a topic versus when are they actually going through to book? And the first thing that jumped out at me was, well, first of all, the client was obviously right. The booking patterns are happening later. People are booking much later in the year, more around July and September. But actually, there was a clear area for opportunity, and that was in the jump from March to April. That move from March into April, we saw more than 40% increase in engagement for travel destination content. And this obviously represents an opportunity whereby, you know, seemingly that there's quite a lull in brand competitor spend at this time. We've not got that big burst at the start of the year. We're not going after late bookers in July and September. It's a bit of a lull when it comes to competitor spend, but actually there is a huge pool of users who are crying out to be inspired for where to go on the next holiday that's not currently being snapped up as much as it could be by travel brands. And the reason this is important is because, as I said, this is real-world user behaviour. At national scale, these are significant groups of people and a significant opportunity to harness. A final example from me for today is some work we did last year for an online grocer. Now, you may think online grocer, in theory, they should have tons of data, but the reality is actually they had very little understanding of what their audience and their customers looked like in the real world, and also very little data to go on to target them. So what we were able to do is match their first-party data with our first-party reading behaviour data in order to really understand what their existing customers are passionate about, what gets them out of bed in the morning, what are they reading on a daily basis. And from that analysis, actually, something really interesting jumped out at us. So despite the fact that we were about to enter into a summer of sport, there was Wimbledon, there was the Olympics, there was the Euros, couldn't move for sport. Actually, this particular audience, this particular grocer's customers actually didn't care nearly as much about sport as you'd think. They were 37% less likely to be reading about sport and actually significantly more interested in things like home cooking and healthy living. What this meant we were able to do then is take this brand out of this extremely cluttered, competitive environment that was sport and move them into spaces which are much more aligned with the passions of their customers and potential new customers. Now, I appreciate, of course, this isn't kind of super complex kind of insight, but actually by taking the existing audience and putting them into the real world, as I said, it really had a powerful impact. And we were not only able to improve the scale of the campaign, but we also improved performance across every single metric. It's just the difference. It's just the power of taking your audience, an assumed audience, and moving them into real world and aligning with that audience, both in terms of what they're passionate about and where they're in that mindset that really matters. So that's pretty much it from me today. I appreciate, as I said, a very top line stop tour, but hopefully it gave you a little bit of an idea of how you're able to leverage first-party data, not only in terms of for activation and being in the right environments, but also how you're able to use that data to really better get to know your audience, understand your consumers, and align with those mindsets that matter. If anyone has any more questions or would like any more examples, my details are up there behind me. Thank you so much for your time. Cheers.